The hulking and brutish creatures known as trolls are found in many of Runeterra's least hospitable environments. Most people may know about ice trolls, but let's not forget that Ezreal even met some desert trolls. And there is even the theory that Jax himself is a troll. Trolls are not immortal, but they have the ability to heal more quickly than other mortal races, which means that they can endure extreme climates on very little resources, by out-surviving their rivals. And this is most likely the reason why some of the largest known tribes still call the mountains of the Freljord their home. Trundle was raised in a filthy cave, along with 15 of his brothers and sisters. But living in Freljord is hard, so only 7 of them grew strong enough to join the ranks of their chieftain's warband, and only 3 remained after their first winter of raiding. As the warband feasted, the chieftain revealed his plans. He wanted to circle back and raid the same lands again. All would fear them and it would get easier every time. Frowning, Trundle stood up and said that this plan was no good. The people they had crushed had nothing left for the tribe to take. They should return next winter when their supplies were plenty, and the livestock grown big enough to make more than a single mouthful. Many of the other trolls did not like this at all. They ground their teeth and thumped the sides of their heads, trying to comprehend what Trundle was suggesting. Was he a coward? Had the cold got into his brain and turned it to slush? The chieftain beat Trundle with a rock and threw him away down the mountainside. Fools had no place in his warband. Trundle wandered far, for he knew he would not be welcome anywhere nearby. He avoided other troll tribes scattered across the tundra, and was careful to keep his distance from the feral Yetis that roamed the highlands. By night, he gazed up at the stars and remembered all the stories he had been told as a pup. Legends of Grubgreg the Wise and other ancient troll kings who followed the old gods and were gifted powerful weapons as symbols of their right to rule the world. Here it is super interesting to see that trolls remember Grubgreg as Grubgreg the Wise. But of course, from Ornn's story, we know that in the ancient times, Grubgreg was actually known as Grubgreg the Hideous, and he was the trickiest of trolls. He was the one who scammed Ornn in a drinking game by slipping a piece of forever melting true ice into Ornn's drink. And for winning their little drinking competition, he forced Ornn into crafting him a vault door to keep his treasures safe. The catch was, the door Ornn crafted was so strong and impenetrable, even Grubgreg himself couldn't get inside his own vault. And of course, these doors would later become Brom's shield. Eventually, Trundle came to a great crack in the ground. While he was glad to be out of the wind, he soon found himself lost in a maze of twisted, howling canyons that seemed to sink deeper beneath Freljord than the mountains rose above it. At the very bottom of that abyss, he met the Ice Witch. She waited for him on a shimmering frozen lake, surrounded by little human warriors skinned in furs and metal. Trundle was not daunted by any of this, but the Ice Witch wanted to know how he had found his way here, into the very heart of her domain, and how he was able to walk upon her lake. Trundle looked down. The ice beneath his feet was darker than the night sky far overhead. It made his brain want to squirm around inside his skull. The Ice Witch told him he was special, something called Iceborn, which meant he should stay there with her. But Trundle did not want this, and told her that he had been cast out by the chieftain, and that he wanted to find a great weapon and become a troll king like Grubgreg and all the others. To his surprise, the Ice Witch agreed, and handed him a mighty club of ice called Bone Shiver. With this, he could become king of all trolls, and form a great alliance with her human tribe. He eagerly agreed, and began the long journey home. When Trundle arrived, the chieftain laughed in his face, until Trundle bashed him overhead with Bone Shiver. In an instant, the old troll was frozen solid by the club's icy magic, and a second blow shattered his body into tiny pieces. Awed by Trundle's newfound strength, the rest of the warband listened to his tale of the Ice Witch and the alliance she had promised. Trundle was smart. Trundle had chosen to wield great power. Trundle would be their king. and with Trundle leading the charge, the time of the trolls would be coming. Now this was only Trundle's bio. Two important things to note here. Trundle is the first non-human character confirmed to be an Iceborn. Of course, the Iceborn are the descendants of the people who were present when Lysandra made a deal with the Watchers back in the ancient times. But back then, because the three sisters of Freljord ruled over the alliance of humans, Yetis, trolls and even the Balestriders, it makes sense that everyone else besides just the humans in this alliance could also be Iceborn. The other thing we should remember in this story is the mention of the Old Ones. The story says how Trundle remembers legends of Grubgreg the Wise and other ancient troll kings, who followed the old gods and were gifted powerful weapons as symbols of their right to rule the world. In Freljord, the old gods refer to the primal gods such as Volibear, Anivia, Ornn and many others. So this story quickly hinted at the fact that these trolls worshipped the primal gods and called upon their powers. Remember this, because at the end of this video, we will quickly hop into Legends of Runeterra, and we will get a lot more information on this. But before we do that, let's quickly have a look at the story that explains Trundle's ruling, called A Feast Fit for a King. The story begins with Trundle traveling to the northern mountains. Trundle carried a big sack slung over his shoulder. It was full of carcasses of Elnuks, Druvasks, feral hogs and clumsy mountain goats. And since he's been traveling for a few days now, the sack started giving off a delicious ripe stink, with the blood pooling inside freezing black and solid. As he ascended the mountains, he stopped for a moment. He was now in enemy territory. There were more ways to die up here than he could count, and he could count a lot higher than any other troll he knew. He might fall into a crevasse, get swallowed by a riddling ice worm, or get cooked in the pot of one of the wild troll clans that lived up this way. Bigger than most other trolls, they didn't have a good sense to know they needed a king to be in charge of stuff, and didn't give an Elnuk's fart for titles. They would rip his arms and legs off for a snack if he tried to be fancy. And the strange thing about this was that despite their seeming lack of leadership, in this clan, there was a giant troll called Yedu, who was going around and telling the other trolls that he was the troll king. Soon after that, some of the ice trolls of the north learned about this other king too. Now, Trundle knew that in the past there were many troll kings and lords. But just because Trundle decided to become a king, it didn't mean the others had to start doing it too. And so he decided to do something about Yedu before things get out of hand. After a while, Trundle could sense that he was being watched. And in fact, after pretending to be casually yawning, while he was in fact sneakily scanning around him, he noticed two humps of snow too big to be natural. Also, he could see a foot sticking out of one, and a patch of hair sticking out of the other. Grinning, Trundle unhooked Boneshiver from his belt, and kept marching forward, pretending like he didn't see anything. Then, when he noticed a pair of eyes staring at him from one of the piles, Trundle waited until he was within range, after which he slammed down Boneshiver into the snow with a satisfying crunch. The troll who just got hit rose from his hiding place with a crater at the back of his head. He was cross-eyed, and he genuinely wasn't sure if he just died. Then the other ambusher jumped out, but being a lot faster than him, Trundle just caught him by his neck. This other troll asked Trundle what he wanted here. He was now in the lands of King Yedu. In reply, Trundle introduced himself as the Troll King. He was here to meet Yedu. Later, as this other troll escorted Trundle deeper into their territory, he introduced himself as Sligu. And he explained that after Yedu heard how Trundle was walking around calling himself the king, Yedu thought why couldn't he do the same? And so, after killing all the other chieftains who refused to call him a king, the others found it easier to just agree with him. Trundle wondered how did Yedu kill all the other chieftains, and Sligu started explaining. First, Yedu punched the head of the Rock Eater's chief right off his neck. Then he ate a lot of cave mushrooms and Elnuk dung, and he smoked the cave glacier trolls out with his farts. And finally, he ate the biggest night soiler troll from his knees up. After that, Yedu became the king. Which was nice, because he also learned that kings could have armies, and that was a nice benefit. Trundle then asked Sliggoo if he also had a crown. Sliggoo wasn't sure what a crown was, so Trundle described it as a spiky hat that tells others that you are the king. Sliggoo replied that Yedu has one of these. Apparently he's been telling everyone that he got it from the belly of an ice worm, but in reality, it looked like he made it from some bones and antlers he found in a pile of dung. A while later, the two arrived at a massive glacial canyon that was crudely carved to resemble a giant troll's head. Apparently it was supposed to look like Yedu, but Sliggoo added that they didn't quite get his nose right. Meanwhile, Trundle was trying to not look impressed. They entered Yedu's cave through the head's nostrils. Two massive trolls guarded the entrance. This made Trundle realize that Sliggoo was probably chosen as a sentry because he was much smaller and sneakier. But still, if these guards were this massive, Trundle wondered how big Yedu could be. At first, the guards wouldn't let them pass through. Yedu didn't want to meet anyone. But after Trundle whacked one of the guards on his head with Bone Shiver, the other guard, Sliggoo's brother in fact, just kept staring at the club. Trundle could almost hear his brain crunching as he was trying to figure out what just happened. So, knowing how long it takes for a troll to process anything, Trundle slung the large sack from his shoulder and showed it to the guard. An irresistible stench of maggoty meat and blood wafted from it. Trundle reached inside, pulled out a dripping hunk of meat, and gave it to Sliggoo's brother. After this, Trundle just walked inside the cave. It turned out Sliggoo's brother was also called Sliggoo, so Trundle cleverly named them Big Sliggoo and Little Sliggoo. As Big Sliggoo led Trundle deeper inside, Trundle noticed how unnatural this place looked. It reminded him of the twisting frozen maze beneath the palace of the Ice Witch. Eventually, they ended up in a massive cavern that had tiny holes in its roof, to let some light in. To Trundle, this place actually looked pretty, but he remembered how Yedu had won these caves. At the center of this place was a giant rock around which big trolls gathered. He learned that the reason why the local trolls were so big was because there was also a lot of monsters around, and so only the big survived. Then Trundle realized that the giant rock in the middle wasn't a rock. Twice Trundle's height, it was Yedu himself. And just as others described, he really looked like a mountain of meat. Originally, Trundle planned to smash Yedu's head in with Bone Shiver, but after seeing the size of his head, he decided against it. So, he came up with a new plan. With a rumbling voice, smelling the delicious stench, Yedu demanded to know if Trundle brought meat. And indeed, Trundle reached inside his sack and presented the remains of a curling horned mountain ram. As Yedu approached him, he recognized Trundle as one of those who says he is the king. After which Yedu mocked Trundle by asking him if he's wearing a cloak because it is too cold for him in the north. Trundle replied that a king has to look good. Which reminded Trundle to check out Yedu's crown. It was the first time Trundle had seen one, and Yedu's looked like a mass of moss mixed with some blood-stained animal bones and horns. Yedu wanted to know if Trundle came here to fight him, and just as he asked that, the other trolls immediately made a circle around them. Trundle replied that fighting wasn't always done with fists. Yedu agreed, he liked to kick things too, but Trundle corrected him that they will use their brains. Yedu then asked him how would they fight with their squishy brains, and Trundle told him that it would be an eating contest. That didn't really help Yedu, as now he was wondering how does one eat with a brain, but Trundle already started preparing the contest. The two kings sat down in front of each other, and other trolls placed unending piles of meat between them. Truly, this was a feast fit for a king, but only one of them could walk away from it. Yedu asked if the goal was to just eat, and Trundle nodded. They would eat and eat. The first one to die would lose. The last troll standing would be the king. Yedu grinned, and he told Trundle that a real king has to also have a really big belly. Trundle was small compared to him, and so this would be easy. Then, for a while, the two trolls exchanged fake stories about what they did. They each tried to outdo the other, with perhaps the best lie being that Trundle once dug a massive hole and peed in it. which created the lake at Recklestake, which is funny because that's where Ash and Tryndamere got married, and that he also took a bite from the moon. This made all the trolls to look up, and witnessed how the moon shrank from this bite. And as they were looking away, Trundle quickly stuffed the now empty sack which he had under his cloak. Then the contest began, and the two started wolfing down whatever piece of dead animal they found. On and on they ate, their audience cheering with every rotten mouthful of food. But somehow, no matter how much they ate, the mountain of meat didn't seem to get any smaller. Eventually, Trundle noticed how Yeru's face was getting red, and how he slowed down his pace, a hint that he was getting full. Then Yeru let out a monstrous belch, which made the audience jump out of the way. Trundle used this distraction to stuff even more chunks of meat beneath his cloak and under his chin. He looked up and saw little Sligo staring at him. The clever little boy must have seen him hide the sack under his cloak. Sligo knew Trundle was planning something, but he didn't tell anyone. He just gave Trundle a slow nod. He watched as Trundle pretended to be eating. All the while he was dropping pieces of meat into his sack, until it was entirely full. Then Trundle asked Yeru if he could pass over his knife. Yeru thought that perhaps Trundle would try to cut him down with it, but Trundle told him he just wanted to make more room in his belly. After getting the knife, Trundle began his masterful plan. He stood up, lifted the knife, and sliced it across his cloaked belly. He let out a convincing groan of relief as the mass of bloody meat spilled out. Then he gave the knife to Lil Sligo. Yeru just stared at him in amazement as he stuffed another chunk of meat into his face. Lil Sligo then told Yeru that Trundle would likely win like this. Of course, Yeru would not allow that. He was still the king around here. And so, just like Trundle, he lifted the knife up and sliced open his belly too, letting the half-digested food as well as his own coiled guts spill out. At first, Yeru grinned as he was getting ready to eat some more, but then he froze. Trundle asked him what's wrong. Yeru tried to answer, but his mouth just flapped as his innards continued to spill from his open belly. Moments later, Yeru sank to the ground, trying to hold the sliced flaps of his belly together. All he managed to say was, "This don't feel so good," before he fell face first into the mound of meat. Little Sligo came forward, and Trundle looked at the small troll with a mixture of suspicion and respect. He realized that little Sligo probably survived in these lands not because he was big, but because he was smart. And because Trundle liked smart, cunning trolls like himself, he told little Sligo he would be welcome to return south with him. Sligo agreed to that, but not before he crowned Trundle as the winner and the true king of trolls. Unfortunately, in this video I couldn't really do justice to how stupid trolls are. You would have to read the story yourself to get the idea. But besides them being stupid, the northern trolls also have another trope. Legends of Runeterra further explored the idea of some trolls using the powers of the old gods of Freljord. First of all, there are the faces of the Old Ones, which are totemic structures that serve as the link between the trolls and the old gods. Then there are the Augurs of the Old Ones. These trolls were taught the chants of the Old Ones. Those who know them can call on their forebearers to imbue their brethren with exceptional power. And in fact, chanting has quite the returning theme around trolls. The faces of the Old Ones quote one of these chants. And there is even a separate card called Troll Chant, which describes how terrifying these troll chants can be. And finally, there is the card called Voices of the Old Ones. And this one describes how the faces of the Old Ones work. These structures emit inexplicable sounds as the wind passes through them. However, as the wind does so, the sounds turn into whispers, spoken in long-lost languages. So these ancient monoliths are likely what allows the old gods to communicate with the trolls. And for the last thing in this video, let me quickly read you the lore of Usgar the Ancient, which Riot revealed through Twitter. Usgar the Ancient is one of the biggest trolls in Trundle's tribe, renowned for his savagery and legendary zest for battle. When butting heads with other trolls became too one-sided, he took on entire Freljordian villages at once, and never left with empty belly. Usgar's territory, won through sheer brutality, grew larger year after year. Until Trundle called a challenge. Though Usgar had both the advantage of size and experience, Trundle managed to best him through trickery, causing an avalanche and trapping the larger troll. Usgar was just clever enough to know he couldn't outsmart the new king, and called a truce through his growls. Ever since, Usgar has gone to battle in the name of his king, knowing the biggest and best battles will be led by King Trundle. And that is all the troll lore I wanted to go through. In short, trolls are actually really cool, and I would like to see more of them in the game. They don't even have to be ice trolls. I would gladly settle for a sand troll as well. Lately, we've been getting too many pretty faces. And it seems like even Mundo is being turned into a pretty boy. Riot, please, give us an ugly boy again.